Hello, everyone. My name is Ashish Kaushal. I'm the CEO of Higher Talent, a diversity staffing firm and consciously unbiased, an organization that's focused on helping clients or companies make work a better place to work at. Welcome. Today, we're doing the Future of Contingent Workforce Buyers Edition. This is our first episode, which I'm really excited about. Today, we have some of the best industry leaders in contingent labor who are going to give their insights into trends for 2024 and, of course, make some bold predictions. 2024 has just gone underway, and it's definitely not calm. We came into the year thinking the Fed's going to cut rates, but the stock market surged. Inflation seems to be under control. However, history has shown us that whenever inflation is high, it tends to repeat itself at least once before it's truly tamed. One of the drivers of this is that many of the multi-year contracts that were negotiated during high inflation. Those contracts are going into effect today. Companies have continued the trend of reducing their full-time employment footprint. Wall Street is still rewarding Main Street to cut their fixed costs, meaning direct hire employees, which is in turn incentivize companies to hire for projects that they can amortize over years to make their earnings look better. Unemployment rate has not dropped, and we have seen more geopolitical instability, complexity, coupled with almost every major nation having their political elections this year. So there is variability all around us. Artificial intelligence is all that anyone talks about. So we're not going to discuss that today. You can ask ChatGPT or Genesis about AI. I'm proud that the last 4 years we've been doing the Future of Work Contingent series. And Will from FanDuel, Brett from Cruise, and Chris from Salesforce asked me, why aren't we doing that a buyer's perspective? And so I said, that's a great idea. Fast forward, now this series has been born and we're expanding a 360 view. We'll be doing a monthly series around the buyer's perspective going forward. On that note, we have a lot to discuss today. What's not to like? The economy's flying high, the GDP's up, the rates are dropping, CPI is leveling off. So is there a soft landing, or is there even a landing at all? And are we back to some sort of normal? We have an amazing panelists today here to talk about the contingent workforce trends. There's Will Ulmer, Senior Contingent Workforce Program Manager at FanDuel. Chris Farmer, Strategic Sourcing, Global Workforce Strategy at Salesforce. Jake Galbraith, Director of Strategic Sourcing at FINRA. And Michael Beckwith, Contingent Manager, Staff Augmentation at Excel Energy. So welcome, everybody. I'd like to start off with, what are your predictions for 2024 in contingent labor? Will, you want to start?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I think that it's not going to be as optimistic as it looks right now. I think there's going to be I think we're going to look back at the end of 2024 and say what happened. I think right now we're kind of flying high on optimism. We see things that are growing. We see things that are going well. But I think the flows are kind of slowing down. I think we're seeing changes in the changes in the way of working. And I think that I don't see 24 as optimistic as most right now. So I guess my predictions are 2024 is going to be an interesting year, and will be one that we look back on and say what happened.
Interesting. Do you think it'll be a lot like 2023?
It's hard to say. I think that a lot of good things will happen, right? I think that we'll see the way of work continuing to change. I think there's a lot of things that will come out of this way of working that we've seen kind of come through, through the pandemic in 2023. But I don't know where that takes us. And I think it's an interesting place for all of us to be from both a buy side and the sell side, that, I think we're all going to be part of this. And I think we'll look back at this later in life and later in time and a longer time scale and say that, a lot of really interesting things took place through 2023 and 2024 that really changed the way contingent labor is viewed and utilized within organizations.
That's fair. I agree with that. Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a continued, it's going to be a continued shift of what I would call a lot of the same thing, just with a different face. From what I can see, companies aren't using less contingent labor. They're from what I can look at, they're using more. They're just structuring it differently, like all investment can help. And so and especially as you look at like the regulations that have been coming out in various states, I think that you're just going to see companies shift it and call it something slightly different, but it's still going to be the same sort of thing.
No, definitely. And Michael?
Yeah, I think, the answer is it depends. It depends on the industry, depends on the sector. Within the utilities world, I see really big plans for growth at odds with, the economic climate, where it seems like everything is moving in the right direction or in a favorable direction. But I think the questions or uncertainty comes around, which companies are fueling that growth and the stock prices. And we have, billions of dollars worth of capital investments over the next 5 or 6 years that are planned, whether it's renewables with solar and wind farms that we're building, or just expanding transmission lines and substations. So I see that we're going to still have a consistent demand. I don't think that as we came out of last year, we're reflective more of the broader staffing industry and many companies, in that last year was really, really low volume. This year, and in looking back at the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen contraction in certain parts of our program, but I think there's definitely opportunities to leverage a different type of contingent labor, or like you mentioned, just Chris, with regards to the type of contingent labor. I think it's just shifting from different parts of the company. I think we're going to have less, from my perspective, less engagement of independent contractors and freelancers in the gig work economy, based on some legislation that's come out and just the internal types of policy and conversations that we've had. So I'm curious to see where it lands, but I do tend to agree with Will that there's probably over optimism, I think, on the supplier side of the equation, and from the buyer perspective, it feels like there's a little bit more uncertainty and not pessimism, but just some bigger challenges that we're going through as companies.
Absolutely. Jake, what are your thoughts? I mean, Chris and Michael and Will all kind of came up with good points around the fact that we are using more, but it just maybe categorized differently. So where do you see the predictions for 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with a lot of the things that have already been said. I liked what Will had said, that it won't be a shock if we're here this time next year and look back and, wonder what happened or how did we get here. I think it wouldn't surprise me one way or another, if numbers were similar to 2023, but I do think it's going to be a lot of uncertainty or inconsistency. I think it is going to be a year where it is creative, as Chris mentioned, on the needs are still there, but how can we get more creative in, bringing in individuals? I'd agree with Michael that from the independent contractor perspective or the gig economy, it's really a cautious optimism or a cautious approach to making sure that the dollars that we do have are being spent, in the right places and where we're going to see the most value.
Absolutely. Chris, have you seen order volumes sort of stabilize, or are they increasing or decreasing? And then we kept hearing that the second half of the year is going to be better, which is kind of kicking the ball down the field and saying at some point we'll be right if we keep saying the next half is going to be good. So what are you seeing?
If we always just say the stock market will go up, eventually you'll be right. It's just a matter of when, right?
Yeah.
I want to go back to what Michael said, actually. You made a good point on 1099 independent contractors, gig economy. I actually think that the much prophesied gig economy explosion, where all of us were going to be, 75% gig economy or gig workers or something, like, out of us on this call, 4 of us were supposed to be gig workers by this point. I think that didn't materialize. And I really agree with you that I think it's going to get more and more difficult to engage with those. Not that people don't necessarily want to do it. It's just, like you said, the regulation is going to come down on it.
I think the government just wants their money. They want to tax it differently, but I might be wrong.
Well, this is my surprise face, Michael. I would not have thought. So, Ashish, to answer your question, then you specifically asked order volumes and what I saw, like where the trajectory would go. I think later in the year. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, or even today. Have you seen an increase or decrease relative to last year?
I think it's interesting. I think it's like who are you supplying, and that will answer your question. I think if you're just supplying direct enterprise level clients, then you'll probably see about the same levels you did last year. But if you're supplying, because I know some of the enterprise clients are shifting towards more of an outsourced like services model, delivery center type of thing. I really doubt that those large delivery center providers are just mass hiring full-time employees. So I would be curious that if you supply that side of things, if you supply the outsourced service providers, what your rec volume is going to do.
That's a great point. Will, your thoughts?
On order volumes?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I've spent the past couple of years in first gen programs, so a little bit of a different focus right now. But I mean, I think there's a lot of things that are coming up, right, that we're talking about here, where it's, things are changing, and Chris, you mentioned, right, these large scale enterprise suppliers that are transitioning into service delivery centers, right? I mean, we mentioned it in our outlook, right? The first question is that things are changing, and I think suppliers are trying to navigate those waters as well. And I mean, if you can repackage everything, but at the same time, it's still what it is, right? From our side, we see it in a different light, and we can repackage it and repurpose it in a different way, and it still looks and feels like contingent labor, but it might have a different title to it. So I think I don't where order volume goes from my side, right? My perspective is a little bit more from a first gen perspective right now, where I think companies are really starting to see a focus into this space, and so I think that could order volume change from what we see. It's hard to say. If things keep retitling into different ways, then maybe we see a decrease, but then an increase in other areas of the business in a different title. So.
Absolutely. Jake, you were going to chime in as well?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, and just speaking again internally, I mean, we had a lot of key initiatives kind of come to a close, which is a great thing. But I think from what I'm seeing and hearing, with some of the uncertainty or the inconsistency, I think it's taken the approach to be a little bit more cautious, or to take a step back and really plan to figure out where we do need that flexibility, looking at, contingent. So it's all about more of the business case and what our initiatives are to drive it. But I think with that uncertainty, I think the second half, of the year, whether things get approved or, where some of the trends end up lying, I do see an uptick, coming. But for now, I mean, from what I've heard, what I've seen, even talking to some of our partners, it has been a slower go. And I can also attest that I think it's a little bit slower out there, just the number of sales calls, emails, solicitations, that we're getting. It's been at an all-time high. So I do think it's a little bit of a slower market in terms of job orders at the moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that kind of brings us to the next point, which it's not that we're reducing, I don't think companies are reducing the amount of work they're doing. Would you guys agree with that? And so if they're not reducing it and we're not hiring, we're reducing the number of direct hires or the full-time employee count, and contingent seems to be also in a recession. It seems like they moved to SOW, which I call some other work, which contingent's very well defined, and everything else is some other work. And it seems like that's where the trend is for the future right now. And it's probably for a few different reasons. One, I think, is that you can amortize the expense differently. And so your profits look better from a Wall Street stock perspective. And then, I mean, it's a little more control and a little less liability based on like what Michael was talking about, regulatory changes.
Yeah, I agree. On the transfer of risk piece, that's the big objective, hopefully, with SOW and some of these outsourced efforts, is that as an organization, we're able to transfer some of the risk of completion to another organization who allegedly may or may not have, completed this type of work with other clients, and have the resources or the relationships with staffing agencies to build out those teams. But I do think my concern is that from a cost perspective, we aren't taking the cost component into the conversation as heavily as transfer of risk, and perhaps some of the, like you mentioned, Ashish, the favorable ways from an accounting perspective to amortize that spend over capital projects versus more internal operational costs.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else want to add to that? Mm-hmm.
I think the cost component from a buyer's perspective is really interesting because contingent workforce programs are a mix. Sometimes you exist on the sourcing finance side of things. Sometimes you exist on the HR side of things. And the HR, if you're on the HR side of things, cost is not necessarily your focus, but if you're on the sourcing side, you are, because not only running a program, but you're also tasked with managing a category of spend. I think it's one of these, as we look at these shifts as well, especially in 2024 and beyond, I think you're going to see more and more of like double, triple markups. I've noticed a lot of these, as I mentioned, like people that are shifting over to like outsourced services models. You're paying a premium for something that those people then will actually go and use my own suppliers, my own staffing agency suppliers, to just hire staffing contractors to fill those roles and charge us, double or triple.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but that's worth the risk coverage.
Well, I think myself and my business partners have different views on that, but I think it's a conversation you have to have, because sure, there's certainly a premium that's worth paying, but I think you also get into some pretty ludicrous territory where you're paying way too much for essentially nothing that's value add, other than someone else is just managing that headcount for you and taking care of that headache.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and I mean, on that note, I'd agree. I mean, there's always a component you want to mitigate as much risk as possible, as Chris was alluding to. But I do think it brings up the bigger point of, within programs or, in these models that we all have, the value of the strategic partnerships and the strategic vendors that we have, and leaning on some of those relationships and using the transparency and the history that you have with them. But I'd agree that we are starting to see some premiums, whether it's niche or independent contractors wanting to do that, mitigate the risk by going through one of the approved vendors, get through the red tape and things like that. It is a trend that we're noticing as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I just remember when I graduated college, I worked for a large provider, and my salary was like $40K, and they were billing that per month for the client. And so they're making their margin back within 1 month, and the 11 months was pure profit.
Mm-hmm.
And I was probably just Xeroxing papers for the client. So they're definitely overpaying for that.
They did a great job at it, though.
Clearly.
Ash, I'm going to counter everything we just said with another trend.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that with continued focusing on AI, and everyone, in 2023, we all seem to really jump on the AI excitement train and start to really use a bunch of buzzwords, and now they're going to have to deliver. Mm-hmm. So if that continues in 2024, I think you will see an increased demand for temp AI talent, because it's going to be frantic to be like, whatever you can do to get it in and get those people, those skills plugged into projects. Yeah. And that's if you're moving as fast as you possibly can and you're not just clearly defining projects, then more staff rec volume for AI roles is going to come for sure.
But you could also go the other direction and say that you're going to take your internal employees, train them on AI because there's not enough skill sets out there, and then backfill them with the other talent that you're replacing them with.
I keep hearing about this beautiful retraining thing and reskilling and upskilling thing. I'd really love to talk to someone who's doing it effectively.
Yeah, that's fair too. Definitely. So let's talk about direct sourcing, because that seems to be another hot topic that's being talked about a lot. There seems to be a disconnect from my perspective on direct sourcing as a marketing term versus the actual value it's providing within organizations. Because I think the overall spend, like the risk for the implementation provider is quite large, and the discount rates, and I'm not sure it's really taking over a huge portion of a program. And I feel like with unemployment still at 3.5%, you could probably do a lot more with candidate reusability and just holding on to the talent you have today, rather than letting them walk into a portal and then come back like 6 months later. But I'd love to hear your perspective on direct sourcing and where you see its place in the market, and from a buyer's perspective, how is that part of your toolbox?
So I'm going to take the last part of the question you said about the unemployment rate. So
Yeah.
I think the unemployment, I don't think that number, I think that number is artificially deflated personally.
Yeah.
And this has been a position I've held for a little while, is that I think that the unemployment rate is a lot higher than that. Whether and where that's coming from, who's to say, right? But I do think that and I mean, if we look and track back to like the labor participation rate is, still sitting at 60% or 62%. One can't, I mean, I guess you can kind of go down the path to say the unemployment rate should be a little bit higher too, right? So that's my perspective on that. But I think that when you talk about direct sourcing, right, I think there's a lot of candidates in the market, but I think the way of working has been changing. We see all this conversation around independent contractors and what's happening in this space, that like those two concepts of the independent contractor gig economy and direct sourcing, I think are at odds with each other at times and are a little bit of a conflicting kind of conversation. So it's, we see all these platforms that are available for us right now where we can leverage, Fiverr and all that stuff, where we can leverage independent contractors to complete tasks. We haven't quite figured out how to make that into more of an enterprise buying situation through direct sourcing. And I think we're still trying to find our path in that. And then my other perspective on it is that I don't think direct sourcing is for everybody. And that might not be a very popular position from how much we've heard about direct sourcing is for everybody, but I just don't see that working for everybody, right? I think it requires specific, status in your market or status in your with your competitors to drive that engagement back into your organization. And I think it basically comes down to branding, right? I mean, how do you sit within the market? Are you able to brand yourself better than others to draw talent? And I think that's what's important about the call that we're on today, right? Is because like from the sell side, we're being told as buyers that direct sourcing is for everybody. It is the best thing that you could possibly do, but it doesn't necessarily always match up with what we believe or what we need. And so I think that, we need to find a better way to bridge that gap and see how direct sourcing works or where it works for the right organization with the right branding, with the right talent stream or the right business plan for the next 2 to 3 years.
That makes sense. Like if you don't have a powerful like consumer brand in the marketplace, then it's hard to sort of get people to just apply to your company directly if they've never heard of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm happy to have my mind changed on that, but that's just what I've seen, right? I mean, I just think that we've seen direct sourcing work and we've seen it not work. And where we typically see it work or where the success stories come from are these big brand names where people are already trying to get in there. And the ones that are signing up without that kind of recognition in the market are having the struggles to get it off the ground.
Yeah, definitely. Michael?
Yeah, a lot of variables that you touched on, Will, that I think are really important, but the branding is the one that I would latch on to as the end all be all, to the extent that a company has invested heavily in its marketing strategy and its brand is known. It's not going to be known for all skill categories or labor categories, certainly. I look at Xcel Energy, and I don't think that generally that's going to be the type of brand that attracts more software engineers, for instance. Or, so I don't think that Xcel Energy would really attract finance or accounting, HR, or naturally some of like the marketing or UX types of roles that are challenging to find, where we're trying to solve the talent shortage. Will there be more linemen and electricians and utilities like skilled trades that are applying to Xcel Energy? Absolutely. And is that potentially an opportunity to take advantage of direct sourcing? Maybe. I think so. But again, I would always come back to the data and looking at the program historically, give as much data as possible and say, are there any trends that we can start to take advantage of our branding? And I look at both from a contingent perspective, but also from the FTE perspective. And yes, there are definitely cases where contingent labor programs are owned or housed on the talent acquisition HR side of the organization. And there might be some better synergies, but, from positions versus contingent labor. And if we're not taking the time to understand what effort or what type of talent exists on the FTE side, and trying to explore better partnership with talent acquisition, I think that direct sourcing efforts are either doomed for failure or just to take much longer to build up. But I also think that a big portion of it is just attributed to the amount of energy and effort and time that you want to put into it, because I don't think that there's a single company out there that can, within a month or two of flipping the switch and going live with the direct sourcing platform, I don't think they're going to experience radical success. It's going to take time and effort, and to the extent that you're willing to have the right people involved in those teams, then I think it can be successful. But there's a lot of dependencies, so I don't think it's right for every company or for every program, especially if there isn't the brand recognition to drive it. So I think that's kind of the starting point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those are great points.
Yeah, and on that note, I'll say outside of AI, I mean, direct sourcing. I mean, it's one of the things that we hear probably the most about, and as Michael was kind of alluding to, it's not the one size fits all that we keep hearing about. And I'd agree with both Will and Michael on the marketing side of things and the brand recognition, but I'll also say that it really just depends on also the history or the maturity of the program, how the program, for contingent workers is set up, as well as, from the recruiting talent acquisition side, and just the nature of the needs in themselves. The most success that I hear from the direct sourcing side, more on that light industrial side, as well as, the recognized companies, and agree with Michael that, from the tech perspective or software engineer perspective, depending on the contingent program or just the internal talent acquisition team, if you have that history and kind of stable historical success of placements, I think with adding in competition and other sourcing tools, you can kind of achieve some of the same results. So it is, as you mentioned, that investment and the time up front to set it up properly versus what incremental change or value that you start to see out of the back end.
Yeah, and also, one of the things I really love what Michael just said was that if you look at it from a segmenting standpoint, maybe there's a niche within your brand that actually it makes sense for, and you do it across that, but don't do it across everything, because you're probably going to end up affecting your supply chain if you do it across everything and it's not thought out properly.
That's a really big call out that I didn't mention, and I think remiss if we don't mention, like, the relationships. I guess the question is, why would you implement a direct sourcing program? And of course, there's like potential cost savings if you're looking at it from a procurement perspective. But I think if you look at it from a program ownership and a program management perspective, it should also be able to, one of the byproducts of an effective direct sourcing program is you're reducing your supply base in one specific or maybe 2 or 3 specific areas, and that allows you then to have deeper, better relationships with your existing suppliers or the other suppliers in the program. And so I think, as much as possible, just calling out that one of the objectives of a direct sourcing program, while it may be counterintuitive, is to improve the quality of relationships that we have with our suppliers, because we may not need as many of them. And the larger the company gets, it feels like in many cases the larger your supply base grows, depending on what level of governance you have over that.
Yeah. What's from a buyer's perspective, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. When the decision process for direct sourcing, what makes you choose direct sourcing over maybe like a master service agreement or master vendor agreement?
I think the segmentation that I mentioned earlier comes into play a lot. There are certainly labor categories where I've seen those master supplier agreements, primary supplier agreements be successful, and light industrial or PMO services or some of these other areas that you can really carve out a population of workers. But I just, having started off on the Manpower Experis side of the equation, which is one of the larger staffing companies globally, they basically claim to do everything, right? And I know that the companies that generally claim to do everything are going to be, at least on some accounts, misrepresenting their capabilities. And I think we would be short-sighted if we tried to select any one supplier to cover an entire program. And so it's just, there really isn't a difference from my perspective in direct sourcing versus a master supplier. Both of them are going to use your brand. Both of them are going to, you know, lock you in with specific rates, whether it's markup or, you know, bill rates driven. So it's a similar conversation, I think, in many ways, and not a myth perhaps, but just another spin on what that master primary supplier model is, because that's basically what direct sourcing becomes, hopefully with some more candidate ownership and retention of talent and proactive versus reactive types of strategies.
Yeah. Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think direct sourcing is interesting because the way I look at this, and whenever people come up and, you know, try to pitch me new ideas at conferences or tell me there's these new great amazing things, at the end of the day, our programs exist to connect contract talent with needs from our business partners and make that work happen in however we can do that, right? And I look at you know, master service agreement with a staffing agency, I look at direct sourcing, or even look at in-house programs. You're all essentially doing the same thing, right? You're recruiting talent, you're vetting resumes, you're setting up interviews, you're collecting feedback on candidates, you're finding different candidates, like whatever that is. So when I look at direct sourcing, that's where I start to go is, do I have the capability to actually manage the recruiting side of it, right? The like filtering what comes out of the direct source platform or the pipeline of resumes, whatever it is. Do I have a team that's skilled and versed in doing that, or does someone else have to do it? And usually if someone else has to do it, then you start recreating a staffing firm within your own team, right? And then there's definitely a line, because I've looked at this quite a bit myself. There's definitely a line where that connection or that cutoff hits, where it's just, maybe it's actually better value add for me to not even go to that much trouble. But that also is where the technology comes in, right? Like if AI can get better at really finding or vetting candidates, which there's arguments if it can or can't do that, but then maybe the costs come down from direct sourcing enough to where it becomes even more interesting. And that said, I do think we all have a huge opportunity in the silver medalist space, right? Or previous contractors have worked for us. If you're not tapping into that pipeline of talent, then it's kind of interesting, because you pay how much markup to staffing agencies to find you all this talent, and then you just, you know, watch it go away and never try to bring it back if they were good. I definitely think there's significant opportunities there.
Yeah, it comes back to almost what you said at the beginning about why are we focused as much on direct sourcing versus reusability and redeployment, because I think even with a lot of successful direct sourcing programs, I think that's one of the elements that's missed. And I'll, you know, reference my previous role at Thomson Reuters, where I think we had a very successful program, and at the end of the day, we still were missing on the, you know, redeployment and engagement piece in many ways. It's not to say that we didn't have those, but I think that's still probably the biggest opportunity that most companies are missing out on.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think if you, and that's also another system you have to integrate, right? What the VMS ability to do this directly.
But why so many systems is the question that I keep on asking. You know, why do we need another technology platform?
Yeah, the VMS.
We've
already got Salesforce. We can use a platform as a service. We should just build everything on Salesforce.
Yeah, Michael, I really like how you think. You know, that I do agree with that. Like whatever platform it is, I do think Salesforce is uniquely qualified and a great fit for that sort of thing. But why do we use so many various technologies when we all have the ability or the technical ability to consolidate these features into a single platform, like one platform to rule them all, right? Like why aren't we doing that? I mean, I can get why, right? Like there's all sorts of legacy platforms out there. Most of us are probably using a VMS that's from the 90s. And it's, I don't know. I think,
but yeah, but if we abstract that concept, it's, you know, it's relationship management. That's what we're doing at the end of the day, whether it's with a candidate, a vendor, or an internal stakeholder. It's all relationship management. And so it's just interesting how convoluted the market has become and how some of these other products have emerged as, you know, standalone options when it's so much replication or duplication of features and functions. And it's, yeah, maybe a slightly improved UX in some cases, but even that, I I think we're going the wrong direction with trying to bolt on more tools. I think we have the right tools. We've had the right tools for a long time, but we're, refusing to adapt and evolve in many cases.
Yeah. And I think, look, my approach for the reusability part is if you came to me and said, I feel like I placed let's say I placed Chris at Xcel Energy, and then he's on a 6-month project and you have a 2-year tenure limit. And then you come back to me and say, you send an email to the manager saying, is Chris eligible for extension? Yes or no? And they say, yes. Are you going to extend him? No, I don't have budget. Then let the system sort of email Chris and say, here's open jobs while he's on site. And if he gets a placement, you come back to me and say, hey guys, I'm going to reduce your markup as a vendor because I'm going to extend the length of the project. And so everyone wins. The candidate wins, the supplier wins, the client wins because they get cost savings, plus they get to reuse somebody who already has business knowledge that they've trained. And so I think that's a much faster impact on cost savings and delivery than any other platform that's out there right now. And it's a process issue.
Yep.
That's my little thought for the day. I mean, I agree, right? I mean, it's a process issue, and I think we get hung up in old processes here, right? In this space at times, right? We get we get hung up in old processes that have worked, and we can find ways to repeat, but we haven't really found anything that's one to rule them all, right? In Chris's words, right, is that there's so many bolt-ons that it is a big piece that you have to think about when from the buy side, is that eventually you're bolting on too many things. Eventually you're overextending your capabilities to deliver a quality product back to your internal customers, right? Which is how I typically intend to look at the engagement managers that we support. And so it's hard to say, right, from a direct sourcing perspective, where it fits in, how it fits in, does it fit in? I mean, there's a lot of avenues that you have to explore to truly find the right place for it. And I think that, I think the more that, that we keep being told that it's the right thing for everybody, the more that we become skeptical, because it becomes more that we have to process. And when we're building out process and we're building out procedure, when it comes to this, right, we also have to think about the sales that go into it from our side. So it's twofold that, how much energy that Michael, mentioned, right? How much energy can we put into this and make it effective for our internal customers?
Yeah. And if your curation team stinks, then it doesn't work anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, I would echo, right, on the redeployment, re-engagement, right? At the end of the day, the core of our job is to find top talent or the right talent as effectively and, efficiently as possible. And, Ashish, I think you hit it, right? That is the quickest, cheapest way that you can do it. And if we're all struggling or focusing on bringing in the right talent, if we have talent that's known, and qualified, I think it's a no-brainer. But it is a process issue. It's easy to get complacent when things are working, and stable. But, I think there's a lot of effort, that can go into it, changing things across the enterprise. But it's needed. And it's the same with tools and tech. We see something every day, every month that could increase, our functionality or visibility, a couple %, but it's weighing all of the effort to rip and replace or to implement, new things. That it's a fine line of when you make that change, because you can't be changing VMSs every year. I mean, can't speak for everybody. It's not something I want to do very often, but there's a lot more, involved behind the scenes, all of the business processes, getting all the stakeholder requirements, that it's not as easy of a change as it may appear on the surface. And I think, direct sourcing can be similar to that whether it's segmented or there's a lot behind the scenes that it needs to fit into, that I do think it's overlooked, or it's just easily, sold as it can do X, Y, and Z. It can give us this cost savings or increase candidate quality, but what's that level of effort even on, from us as the buyer side to even get it to that point? It's hard to quantify a lot of times.
No, absolutely. So I kind of call it, we're in like a faux session, a fake recession, or maybe it's a vendor recession or procurement recession as well, because a lot of pressure on you guys to get cost savings. Is that the initiative this year for most of you, is that we have to figure out how to is it more about cost savings, or is it more how do we efficiently get talent to you faster? Like, where is the push right now within corporate America? And I'm asking this because other buyers are watching this and they'd love your advice on this.
So I actually have a question for the panel, because what we're talking about here, reassigning contractors that we found already to new opportunities and we don't lose them, things like that. I would argue that most of us on this call, with the exception of you, Ashish, like, we're all several steps removed from the people actually doing the recruiting, right? Like, I have a team who manages my MSP team and that manages the supplier teams like Ashish, who then have recruiters that then go find candidates and come back and submit resumes and all of that. Like, are you as the buyer, or like you as the owner of the program, or is your direct team actually assessing where candidates are or trying to find new homes for new candidates? Or I always love these conversations because I feel like we talk about like the enterprise buyer, or like the contingent workforce program owners on the enterprise side, as these people who are out recruiting or like reassigning talent or things like that. But there's such a system that we manage to do that. So I'm curious how that like fits for everyone, like how that would even implement, or if this is a conversation we should be having with our supplier partners, like the hire talents of the world, right? Of like, hey, how do you track, and maybe Ash, maybe you can answer that. Like, does hire talent track people? And do they go, and do you then like resubmit resumes to the same company if you know that the person's worked there before and they do well? Like, how do you do that? And are you doing that already?
We are doing that, but I also say that even if we have I like to say we have the best recruiters in the world, but ultimately the VMS could do this much more efficiently than we could, right? And so one of the things I challenge my team is, I'm like, and I've been talking to Beeline about implementing this as well, is if you put this candidate reusability tool, basically it's a 2-query question, and let the VMS start doing that, and my recruiters are competing with the VMS to try to get that candidate who's already on site placed on another job, it's gonna increase reusability no matter what from every vendor. And so yes, we do that, but I think there's ways to systemize that actually are much more efficient than how we do it. And that's where the cost savings comes back. Because if you place them for me on your project, why wouldn't I pass some savings to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're saying you'll pass along some savings next time?
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
cool. Appreciate that.
And you're speaking for all suppliers, though, right?
No, I'm saying if you suggest it out there, it might actually happen.
Just want to make sure we're clear.
There's a link I'll share, and I'll have them share in this kind of approach where everyone wins in supply chain actually helps make that happen.
I really do agree with the point that VMS is the place to make this happen, because that's kind of like the one front door, at least for us, of all contractor engagements. So if there's a single place that could view contractors coming in and out, track when they're coming off assignment, know what their skill sets are, and then flag potential matches for open roles, the VMS should be doing that, and it should be automated.
Yeah.
And Chris, I mean, to your point, I mean, from our side, and I agree, it's hard at times being a couple steps removed, but can obviously help build. It goes back to that process, right, and mechanism to catch it early, get buy-in, from the stakeholders or hiring managers to provide that feedback, and try to do it early enough, right? If it's 30 days out, 45 days out, are we going to extend these individuals? Are they, what are their strengths, weaknesses? And it goes back to a lot of manual effort with some of the VMSs today, or just the data visibility perspective from that. But it is something we're trying to do. It's probably we're trying to do more effectively, in this year.
It's great. I'm glad you guys are doing that. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, as a program owner being, like you said, a few steps removed, the most important thing that I feel like we can contribute as the program owner is the data visibility, and say, the one level down, drill down into, okay, yeah, X number of requisitions over the last 24 or 48 months, the 2 to 4 years time frame to start to understand, like, to what extent do we have positions that are recurring versus non-recurring. And the same way that you look at, a direct source program implementation and say, okay, yeah, 40% of our positions are project management and business analysis. Well, these are the areas that we should primarily target for reusing candidates because we know generally that we're going to have those roles. And it's the same thing with reusability. It's like, if you look at the positions that you have very, very infrequently, well, those aren't the types of candidates generally where you are going to be able to reuse them. So I think it's also being smart and not trying to build a program that covers your entire population of workers and just find a smaller piece that you know you're going to be successful with, or at least you should be based on the data, and then provide that to whether it's an MSP or an internal PMO or a direct sourcing program or whatever it is. It's just, I think, arming them with more data to be smart with how they're working.
And so going back to the priorities for this year, are you looking more at cost savings or delivery? Like what's the focus today?
Yes, right. I mean, anytime you can get, cost savings, make your program run more efficiently, more effectively, increase candidate quality, it's always a win. I do think we took a better approach from a vendor optimization perspective, making sure that we, are aligned with the right partners. The partners have all the information that they need. In turn, reducing volume of the approved vendors, working with those vendors. We did see, better rates, which is leading to, some cost savings. But at the end of the day, we're trying to alleviate the burden, of our managers and make sure we're hiring as effectively as possible. So that efficiency and effectiveness of our vendors supplying the right people, and then us kind of retooling the interview process, making sure things go seamlessly. I mean, time is money. So anywhere we can, reduce the time spent in bringing someone on and making sure they stay, that's really where we've been. But at the end of the day, it is producing cost savings, indirectly, but just saving time.
Yeah, I love that. And Chris?
I'm mulling like three different things right now. Which direction do you want me to go?
Your choice.
Man, come back to me. I'll yep.
All right. I know Will's standing up a program, so you're defining it the way you want it to be, which is awesome.
Yeah, I'm a little bit different than for probably compared to everybody else on the panel. Ours is a little bit different perspective right now. More structured around visibility than any other than delivery or cost savings. So I probably have to defer on this question to everybody else.
And Michael?
Well, I would definitely agree that visibility is a key feature of our program that is lacking, and is at the policy level, something that I'm trying to work with legal and compliance teams on, just better definitions around our worker types and classifications and where the system of record is. You have, around 11,000 non-employee workers that I think 700 of which we actually capture the job title and the rate that we're engaging them at. So a relatively small percentage of visibility. So that is a big effort this year, in parallel to what I think is, my focus for just about every role is, how do I build stronger relationships with the people that I'm working with? And that's inclusive of our vendors, our MSP, our internal stakeholders. And I think it's really a lot easier to accomplish things when you have trust built up, and it unfortunately does take time, but just working on personally being more patient with large organizations, the speed that they move in. I believe that the byproducts of stronger relationships are going to be more favorable pricing, better level of efficiency when it comes to how we're managing change. And not a single one of us probably would look to the next year and say that we don't anticipate a lot of change. So I think that's, the key for managing through it is stronger relationships, and that's what I'm going to continue to focus on.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Chris?
Yeah, so Michael, when I took this program over, that's exactly where I used to be, was about 10 or 12% of our entire contingent workforce that we could actually give you any sort of visibility to. and we had like over a dozen systems that everyone was manually sitting in. So we went through a huge initiative to consolidate all of that into a single front door and a single repository. So if you ever want to talk about that, reach out. I'd be happy to talk through like what challenges you're facing. But Ash, to your point, 2024, I think it's a mix for us in terms of cost, but also delivery. So where can we do what? There's a lot of regional strategy happening for 2024. There's definitely cost consciousness, and at the same time, there's a recognition that Salesforce is all in on AI. Like we're an AI company, and so that's going to require a lot of skill sets that we probably are going to need to pay a premium for. So cost may become secondary to that. So I'd say primarily the business function and what they need is number one, with cost being secondary.
I love that. And I think that's smart. I think it's long-term. You're investing in the future, which is amazing. What are you guys feeling about you have a VMS, right? Which gives you, whether you want to do rate card or fixed markups, like you've sort of standardized the cost of the same talent doing different talent doing the same roles. So is vendor neutral still really important to you if you already have that sort of in play? Or are you guys moving towards more relationship-based programs?
I would recommend we move towards more relationship-based programs, because having a large number of kind of nameless, faceless suppliers, I don't think really serves what I need very well. I would much rather work with a smaller number of people who have deep relationships with Salesforce and understand us and know that they can invest because there's fewer suppliers, so that they can, like, they're going to definitely make revenue out of that relationship, so they can lean into it.
I can
Yeah, I agree as well. I think vendor neutral programs are maybe a way of the past. And we should all kind of consider that time was good, and we need to think about it in a little bit different model. I mean, I think Jake mentioned it earlier, right? We're bombarded on a daily basis with supplier contacts and requests for meetings and requests to show your differentiators. And like, it's going to sound terrible, but like, I don't think the world needs another staffing company right now. I think let's vet out the ones that we currently have, and then maybe we'll come back to you and ask for another one to be formed. But I think we got enough. And I think that we need to start limiting our approach. And I think that there's positives that come with it, right? When we saw these big booms in hiring, right, it was, we needed more suppliers in a lot of places, right? We needed more suppliers because we needed to generate more candidates. And so now that we see kind of consolidations that are taking place and things that are happening in the way of working and how that is changing, then, I think more tailored approaches to our supplier engagement is kind of the way of the future. And that's just my perspective. So
if we don't need more staffing companies, do we need more staffing apps?
No. No.
Well, I think it comes full circle back to the beginning of the conversation here. Like, what's the outlook? I think the outlook for suppliers is we don't need more of them. We're in a saturated market when it comes to the supply of suppliers, and people always ask, well, what's the process for adding a vendor to your program? I don't know what it historically has been, but I always tell people the same thing. It's like, well, if there's business demand that we're not able to meet with our current supply base, we'd consider adding a new one. But if we don't have additional business demand and we have an ample amount of suppliers to cover what we need to do, there's, in my mind, an abundance of suppliers that doesn't quite add up.
Yeah, I would agree with the same, for sure. And I also, to connect the previous point we just touched on, if you're looking for cost savings, a great way to do it is to have fewer suppliers, because Ash, I'm sure that you would be willing to work, hypothetically, you would be able to work with me if I was like, hey, you're guaranteed 10, 15 placements. Can you lower your markup? Can we get, 20% less or something? And I historically, my staffing partners have always been stoked to do that, because they know they're going to they can invest because they're going to get the placements. But it's hard to do that when you have, 36 suppliers all chasing the same amount of recs versus 6 of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, on that note, right, it can be vendor neutral as long as you have the time and bandwidth to have strong relationships with all of them. And all those vendors have all the information and the relationships that they need to be successful. But, it's not a secret. It's a give get from, buyer vendor side of, as Chris just mentioned, if I can promise you more volume, more opportunity, I get to ask, more strict SLAs or, better T's and C's on things and rates. And it's that partnership, and it goes to the relationships that if you have 100 approved vendors, you don't have time to have 100 detailed relationships to get creative. So I think that is a huge part of all of this, is that relationship and keeping your vendor network to satisfy the business needs, and not add, just to add on one-offs and things. So I'm in agreement with everybody.
You give me a different thing to think about. So I'm looking at this on this LinkedIn Live, and 4 of us are at home right now. So in terms of your work from home policies, do you think the 4-day work week or working from home once or twice a week is where we're going to land at, or do you think organizations are going to force us all back in the office at some point? And second part of that question is, if you do have a work from home policy, is there any flexibility on the rate? Say I get paid $10 an hour if I show up in person, but I get $9 an hour if I want the flexibility to work from home, and I save on the commute dollars.
Well, I hope they don't push me back to the office. I'd have to relocate to a new state.
You and me both will.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think again, I've said it multiple times, right? I think the way of working, and this is including, right, return to office, everything is kind of changed. And so I think we're still kind of in that influx time where, going back to the first thing we talked about, right, is that things are changing. And I think that things are changing at a dramatic rate, and that there will consistently be change in this environment where we talk about return to office as well. And, I think companies are going to explore the opportunity to return to office. And then I think some companies are going to do that and then have to roll it backwards. So I think that will be kind of both sides of the equation.
The math supports that we would be afforded some hybrid option, just based on this call is a very small subset. But if 4 of us are working remotely on this call, I know it's not representative of the broader population, but there's just so many workers that are engaged in locations based on availability of talent, that are outside of the operating regions of a specific company. And I just don't think that we're going to get to the point where there's an availability of talent to fully justify or warrant, return to office across the industries. Or maybe I'm wrong.
I agree with Michael. I think availability of talent will dictate the need to be at least hybrid, if not have the remote options.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Gal. This is great. I want to end this with, what are you most optimistic about the future of contingent workforce?
So I'll start again. I think I said I'm not optimistic, or I have some skepticism around optimism for 2024, but I am extremely optimistic about what will change, because I think we're, if we look at history, right? I mean, the way of when contingent labor was introduced into like the subject of hiring, right? I mean, that was a kind of a breakthrough in the way things were hiring. I think we're on the kind of the cusp of the next breakthrough. And I think that we all, no matter what side you're on, buy or sell side, I think we're all are going to be part of the next wave of contingent labor. And so I think that's what I'm most optimistic about, right? Is that I think we're going to see all these rapid changes, and we get to be part of those conversations moving into the future.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind, Ash, was the unknown. I think we are, with whether it's new technology, tools, the working from home, getting access to larger talent pools, where that's going to take us, whether it's new VMSs, new AI tools that can help with X, Y, and Z to give us better visibility, better insights to make better decisions. I think we've made a lot of progress. We've seen a lot of new offerings that it'll only keep improving. So excited to see where this year takes us.
Definitely. And Michael?
Yeah, I'm just optimistic based on mainly the history that we've seen. You know, when you look at the markets broadly, we have been growing, and we're going to experience corrections, and I think we're arguably still in need of one. Like, we're going to find, you know, support. We're going to find an opportunity to continue to advance, and so I guess, you know, optimistic on humanity broadly, that we're going to continue to find solutions creatively to problems that are facing us.
Definitely. And Chris?
Yeah, I'd say we have a really exciting opportunity in the industry to shape what AI does for us. If you're not on an AI advisory panel, or if you're on this call listening and you want to invite people like myself or the people on the call to an AI advisory panel for your company, let's do it. I think AI can be really, really impactful, and I think, to call back what I said earlier in the call, at the end of the day, AI has to help us connect contract talent to business opportunities and make that better than the way we do it now. Otherwise, what's the point? And I look at a lot of companies that are kind of lost. They're like, yeah, we're doing AI, but excuse me, we're doing AI, but they can't really quite articulate how it's going to benefit me as the enterprise buyer. So get involved with enterprise buyers. Let's start shaping what this future looks like. And I think that's really exciting.
I love that. Well, thank you all. This was amazing, and I really enjoyed the discussion. Hope everyone in the audience enjoyed it as well. It was super insightful and engaging.
Thanks, Ash, for putting it together.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it, everybody.
Appreciate it.